Of all of Jesus' disciples, I find Thomas to be the most intriguing. He has been given over the centuries the moniker of Doubting Thomas, but earlier in John's Gospel, he was Thomas the Courageous, because when Jesus told the disciples that he was going to go into Jerusalem into certain death, and when he could not be dissuaded, it was Thomas and Thomas alone who turned to the other disciples and challenged them to accompany Jesus into Jerusalem so that, as he said, we might die with him. But the events of Holy Week, with the washing of the disciples' feet, with giving them a new commandment in John's Gospel that they love one another as Jesus has loved them, with his betrayal, with Jesus' betrayal, and by someone whom he trusted, with his denial by someone whom he loved, and almost a complete abandonment of all of the disciples, except with the possible exception of the disciple whom Jesus loved, according to John's Gospel. Thomas was not with the disciples on that Easter evening. Earlier in the morning, you may recall that when Mary Magdalene came back from the tomb, she told the disciples that the tomb was empty and that she had seen angels. Well, this seemed to have been too much for Thomas. He had to get away. And so he was not there that evening when Jesus appeared in the house with the windows closed and the doors locked. When the risen Lord appeared to them and breathed upon them, giving them the Holy Spirit, John's Pentecost experience. When the disciples found Thomas and told him what had happened, he said that he would not believe that Jesus was alive unless he could feel his wounds, see them with his own eyes. And this is where he got the moniker Doubting Thomas. And yet Thomas did not allow his doubts to keep him away from the disciples. For 8 days later, or on the first day of the week, when Thomas was with the disciples again, Jesus appeared, this time to Thomas. And Thomas believed. Several years ago, many years ago, 30 years ago, Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote a book entitled When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It was in response to the death of his son Aaron, a child who was born with a genetic disease called progeria, where he aged rapidly. Shortly after his third birthday, he died a little old man. Kushner says that he had to do some rethinking as to who God was and who he was and what life was all about. I do believe that there are times in our lives when we have to recalibrate. Everything that we think that we believe and have always held dear somehow falls apart when some type of event or tragedy happens in our lives. And we have to wonder to ourselves where God is in the midst of all of this. Dorothy Zola, a German theologian, in her book Suffering, talked about such experiences. She says that when tragedy happens or when bad things happen to people whom we love, that we have a choice to make. We can either make that person God's martyr or the devil's martyr. We turn that individual into the devil's martyr if we allow the circumstances to push us away from God or to make us cold and bitter and withdrawn within ourselves. Or we can make the person God's martyr if it fills us with a sense of compassion, draws us closer to God, and helps us call upon strengths that we never knew that we had. There are times in our lives when we have to recalibrate our faith journey. And one of the things that we need to remember is that we should not ever let our doubts keep us away from the community of faith. For like Thomas, who in spite of our doubts, when we find ourselves within the community of faith, whatever that may be, we will also find the risen Lord speaking to us in one form or another. In a different gospel at a different time, Jesus promised that wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, that he would be in their midst. And so he is. And so if you have not found a church home, I encourage you to seek one diligently. If that which was your church home no longer speaks to you in a spiritual sense or challenges you in your spiritual growth, then find a new one. But whatever you do, do not let your doubts keep you from the community of faith. I'm Frosty Crummell, the minister at First Federated Church in Peoria.